We're going to see the discussion, and we talked about the greatest commandment, and you all know what it is. It's to love God and love your brothers yourself, because the whole law depends on this. Then Jesus asked them a question. It has to do with about how could David call his son Lord, and it shows that he is actually divine, and he was expected to be divine. But now we're going to turn to the last few verses where Jesus is going to turn and rebuke the scribes and Pharisees, and then he's going to talk about the widow and her 2 coins, all right? So there's only, 5 or 6 verses here in the end of chapter 12, but they're really quite important. So let's read them, and then we can talk about it. So verse 38 of Mark 12. And in his teaching, he was saying, beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and like respectful greetings in the marketplaces, and chief seats in the synagogues and places of honor at banquets, who devour widows' houses and for appearance sake offer long prayers. These will receive greater condemnation. Now, this is probably just an overview of a longer talk that Jesus would have of warning them, because it's like a summary, bullet points, aren't they? All right, so Jesus has had these confrontations with the religious elite of their day. Now, every society culture has people that like the position of being in charge, especially religiously. And what we have been emphasizing all along, there's a difference between religion and Christianity. And in contrast to these individuals who like the praise of men in the chief seats, he talks about them in the manner they like the robes they wear. Why would they like the robes they wear? They're long, but why? They show off because they set them apart from everyone else, all right? Why is it some people in the name of religion like to wear special garb? Huh? It's vanity, really. It sets them apart as though that they're somehow more spiritual than you. And it's always been that case. But then you go, wait a second, Jack. Weren't the high priest and the priest supposed to wear special garments? Well, yes, all right? Because they were serving God in the temple. But in normal day life, why would I wear my collar around backwards? Just so they could call me reverend or, father, something like that. Of course, Jesus already said, call no man father on earth because you have one father. And what about reverend? Who's the only reverend person there is? We see in the Old Testament, only God is. And it's really trying to hijack his name for yourself. And so they like to walk around long robes. They like the respectful greetings. And of course, it's by the titles which men will give them. And that's truly today the same way. So often people will go, hello, Reverend Hafer. And I go, just call me Jack. Because am I Reverend? Am I any more holy than anyone else? If my wife was here, she'd go, no way. She's not here today, so we're like. But no, there's no way that you should ever should lift up one person above the other. In fact, Jesus says the opposite. The greatest among you will be the servant. And so that's why he's rebuking them. You don't understand your position. It's to lead people by example and not to be some type of lord over them that they serve you, because you're really there to serve them. So he said the greatest will be the last, and the greatest will be the least. So they like the respectful greetings. My dentist, he would always call me Reverend because he goes to a church where they address their preacher as Reverend. So it's just Jack. And then he'll introduce me, this is Reverend Jack or Hafer. And no, it's just Jack. Now, is he being respectful when he does that? Yeah, he means well. So, but I have to tell him, no, don't call me that. I'm just Jack. And then they like it. Now, is there a difference between talking to me and the President of the United States? How would you address him? You would never say, hey, Don, how's it going? That would be rude and disrespectful because it has to do with respect for authority in our government and all that, right? But when it comes here, Jesus is rebuking them for that. They like the chief seats in the synagogue and the places of honor at banquets. So when they have a banquet, it's Mr. Carroll. Come up here and sit in the front. We have a nice place for you. All right? Now, is it wrong to be honored in a banquet? No. What's their problem? They imply it, they should be. Yeah, they love it, and they lobby for them because whoever gets in the chief seat is going to look the best in the people's minds. Now, when we go on mission trips, inevitably, everywhere I've been, I'm just thinking real quickly, maybe not so much in Chile, but in Africa especially, they will serve us separate from everyone else. And they'll put us in a different room, and we'll have different food than the rest of the people. And we'll have different utensils to eat with, because often in Africa, at least, they eat with their hands. At least we'll be given utensils. And at first, you just feel really awkward. You know, I just want to sit with the rest because I'm not elevated. But it's their way of showing respect and hospitality, all right? And so you learn just to go with it. Now, there's a difference between accepting it and another thing, demanding it. Demanding it shows what? Yeah, I got an attitude problem. You need to deserve me with respect because I'm somebody. No, and that's what Jesus is condemning there. They love seats in the synagogue, the places that honor at banquets. And then he says, more personally, what do when it comes to their daily life? They're using their position of power. Here he says to devour widows' houses, but in contrast, to look like they're really religious, they offer these long prayers in public. Now, let's talk about devouring widows' houses. Now, we've talked about before, the most vulnerable people in any society and culture are widows and orphans, because they have no one to take care of them, the orphans. Widows in their days really had very little legal rights. And so when their husband died, you know, they were really destitute. And so God, throughout the Old Testament, and pure religion, James says, is to visit the widows and orphans in their distress, right? Well, it's because they're so vulnerable, and legally, in a position of power, you can take us. And what would you do because of that? You'd foreclose on their house. As soon as they're late, you start a proceeding at the sheriff's cell. Not equivalent, but they could do things like that, and they could seize widows' houses legally, but it's only because of greed. Yeah. And God's condemning them for that, because now they're not only a widow, but they're homeless. And it's all because of love of money. And they have that position, they could do that. So Jesus says, you know, they're going to have some condemnation, because what they're doing is so antithetical, or the opposite of who God is. All right? Then the other thing he condemns is long prayers. So who's ever heard a long prayer? All right. Who's ever given a long prayer? Don't raise your hand. All right. What do we mean by a long prayer? Is it wrong to have a long prayer? No. So what is Jesus condemning here?
They're doing long prayers for the sake of being seen by the people to be something that they really are not.
All right. So what's an example of a long prayer? How would you describe it?
One that tickles man's ears instead of God's.
Okay. That's the thing. You're choosing words so people go, oh, isn't that beautiful? Isn't that eloquent? Oh, that's what I wanted to hear. What else? A long prayer. Yes? It just goes on and on and on. Have you ever had a prayer like that? I said, I wish this would stop. Then you feel guilty for wishing it would stop, because you're supposed to be praying to God, but you feel this is just a long prayer. And it's counterproductive to its purpose, yes?
I've had people quote scripture back at God as if God quotes out of the Bible.
Okay. Now, there's a difference between, if you didn't hear them, some people will quote, well, they'll preach a sermon in their prayer. And it's one thing, God, we take you at your word. When you said, if we forgive others, you'll forgive us. It's one thing to talk to him that way as he's talked to us, but it's another thing to quote scripture because really you're preaching to the people that are listening to the prayer. Is a prayer a time to preach a sermon? No, it's not. You're talking to God and you lead people in the prayer, but that's what would happen in these long prayers. I had another one. Hand? Nobody? Yes?
Well, there's one example where, he prayed that I'm so thankful that I'm not like the scumbag.
Oh, well, yeah, he didn't use that word, but the Pharisee said, I'm glad I'm not like this person. Now, whether that was a long prayer or not, it was a self-righteous prayer, wasn't it? Yes, Wayne.
I doubt the person making a long prayer would be seeing themselves as a person who makes a long prayer.
Okay, and that's probably one of the problems because they don't, aren't you spiritual minded? What's wrong with you? And, and again, is anything wrong with having long prayers? Because I've listened to some people, their heart's really in it, and they have